Hey folks, Steve here with a special Highway to the Kremlin 2 video. In this video, we're going to be looking at the Borodino scenario, the beginning of it at least, and we'll see how far we can get. Now, this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 turn scenario, which means we're probably going to end up with a handful of videos here. I'm going to try to go slowly through the game mechanics, describing it as we go, because we're going to go through the sequence of play, obviously, and show the important steps as we play the game. But I also will try to speed things up later, so it could be that turns like 4, 5, and 6 may all get into one video, where turn 1 could take more than one video, depending on how fast we go. And we're going to get started here soon. I do want to take a moment. I have gone now through a couple of hour-long videos that I've since deleted because of issues with the setup, and this is largely coming down to what I feel is a badly conveyed set of rules for setup. So I don't like being negative. This is a knock against the game that it's just rougher around the edges than Library of Napoleonic Battles. And so while I made a video that I thought was accurate for the setup, it was like 80% correct. And then I deleted it because 20% was not quite right. I did a redo video, and ultimately I think I conveyed information that still wasn't right. Um, and I think it's because of the sort of needless confusion that the setup charts do bring, that ultimately isn't a big deal because you can change and fix these things really, really fast. Um, at the beginning of the game, when each player gets their chance to do their organization segment on their turn, that only, I guess, maybe is an issue for the second player, which is usually the French, because, okay, they can't quite fix their organization setup until it's their turn. But this is something that becomes water under the bridge once you start playing, but at the beginning can be a little confusing. Um, the basic thing is when you read the setup information in the booklet, you can set up the charts here, and that's all well and good. That's easy to follow. There is a whole thing here about the depots, and there is, in fact, a specific depot setup chart that tells you whether at a given location there should be a Russian depot or a French one. French depots are non-specific, they just say garrison, and they have to be garrison to work as a supply depot. For the Russians, they don't have to have a garrison to work as a supply depot, and there are specific hexes that are the supply depots. Here, there is a specific icon. It's the sort of circle with a line through the middle, denoting that that is a potential supply depot. Well, you would place the Russian garrisons where it's noted that there should be a Russian garrison. And for the places where there is instead a French one, if it's empty, it's empty. But if there's a French one, the garrisons actually have a a name on them, Smolensk. They are supposed to set up in a particular location. If the French have taken that location, you can relocate that garrison and set up for later scenarios to another depot location that's in communication. And so I put the Smolensk one here in Kaluga. The limitation is it has to be within 18 primary hexes, primary road hexes, I should say, away. And beyond that, you you would need to do the additional line of communication tracing in the campaign game. For a battle scenario like this, we don't necessarily have to do that the same way. And so there are a number of depots way out here that weren't there at setup originally, but because we're allowed to relocate garrisons of places taken by the French, I've kind of filled them out so that they have some ability to push out a line of communication in the campaign game context, even though we're not playing the campaign game, and just as an example. So there's a little bit there. In the previous videos I deleted, I kind of talked about it in more depth, but I think you could follow that part. The tricky bit here um, is really with the unit manifest bits. So when you see a situation like this, where there's Napoleon in a given hex, and Murat is said to be with Napoleon, Napoleon, is going to be in the hex at setup by himself, and the Murat leader will be placed on his picture on the organizational display, and Murat is considered a subordinate leader. Now, you can change that on the French turn, you can swap things up, but that's the way that's supposed to go. Where by comparison, Davout is unit only, meaning you don't put the Davout leader on Napoleon's picture, you put the leader wherever you feel is convenient, but the combat unit of Davout, which is a specific named counter, would go on Napoleon's organization track. And that nuance is not, I feel, really well articulated in the rules. It is there, don't get me wrong, but I feel like it's spread out in the rules in particular places. Now, we're playing a different scenario than that Murat, Davout, Napoleon situation, but there are some similarities here where, like, technically speaking, Rainier here shouldn't be on Schwarzenberg's picture, because Rainier is technically the combat unit only on Schwarzenberg's display. I still need to put this guy somewhere. Maybe I stick him over here to just denote that the leader counter isn't really in play. Um, but if I wanted Rainier to be a subordinate, I could do that by reorganizing and having Rainier there, and then we would put the combat unit on Rainier's organizational display, up here like so, something like that. But we don't have to. We're not going to do that at setup because that's the setup is very particular. But these things can be fixed, and ultimately, we'll talk about later in the video, there is a need here to mess with Barclay de Tolly because he has way too much stuff on him directly and will need to be reorganized. And this will be a difference of opinion on whether or not you have to retreat overstacking units out of the hex at the beginning of the game or not. I don't believe that should be the case. That seems silly to me. Like, why even have the setup that way? Like, why is the game giving you this oddball setup um, that doesn't make sense? Instead, just allow on the first turn here for Barclay de Tolly, he'll get a reorganization segment, and he'll be able to adjust his leadership and his leaders to be in the appropriate command span. It is possible to adjust these things. We just need to go and do it. And so we will do that as a part of play. But just know that at the beginning, as each faction, you're going to want to look at your command leaders and understand their command span limitations. And we'll try to talk a little bit about that in the reorganization segment itself, as a part of this video. So I did cover this in the previous deleted videos. Um, I'm going to try to do an abbreviated version here as part of play. So that's just to get, again, through some of the goofiness that came in with the setups and the way that it's conveyed. And I don't think the game does a very good job of making sure that all of that information is in a co-located place. There's some parts that are cut out in the standard rules. There are some parts that are cut out in the exclusive rules. And some of the stuff in the exclusive rules, to me, doesn't make sense to have been there. It probably should have just been in the standard rules. So this is the issue. If you're reading the standard rules from cover to cover, and then you start to read the exclusive rules cover to cover, and you start to see these weird pieces that maybe should have been reorganized a little bit differently. Now, this just is in the spot where it's a series game where there's always standard rules, there's always exclusive rules. Maybe the exclusive rules could change things, but at least for this one, it just led to some unneeded confusion. I don't like that. That's a bummer. It's annoying to deal with. But I don't know that it's like a terrible mark against the game. It's just something you have to get over. It's a little rougher around the edges, and we'll keep playing it through. The rest of the setup information, I mean, this stuff is relatively straightforward. There are such things as major generals, which you will see here, that have units that are off on the organizational display separately, where they're represented with combat units on a different display. This is all part of the organization capability or breaking off of units. That is possible. So we could say, for instance, Prince Schwarzenberg could tell Rainier to break off from his stack and go do something else, and that's totally permitted, in which case we would bring back the Rainier leader counter, and they would exist likely in separate hexes, or if we were going to create a multi-hex force, we would operate that way. And we'll talk about multi-hex forces a little bit later. So anyway, there is a setup here. We are all set up. We've got all these line of depots that extend from uh, Prussia and Poland all the way out deep into Russia, and we have Napoleon here operating out of Smolensk and Barclay and Bagration not too far away, nearby, and they are close together. Um, Now, this game does use a concept called uh, it's zone of control, but like a weird zone of control. I guess it's not called anything different, but the way it works is different. Because these hexes are so big, a zone of control does not extend out to all 6 hexes around an occupied hex. Instead, a zone of control extends to the hex sides, basically. And anytime you move next to, adjacent to an enemy force, you have the option to lean into their zone of control and become engaged. But that is optional. So we technically could take Murat as the French and like swing around and go this way without being stopped because it is a deliberate decision to enter a zone of control. The hexes are so big, it's a deliberate choice to engage at that level. That is different than other games in the Campaigns of Napoleon series. There are counters that will help us with that, and we'll use and show them as we go. There's all kinds of little rules here. I'm not going to cover everything in super deep depth, but those are going to be kind of the main concerns that we'll need to keep in mind as we play that are not normal war game rules, a little bit different. And for the battle scenario, I should point out, you can see right there in Smolensk is the supply marker. This is a special setup for battle scenarios, different from the campaign. Basically, what this allows us to do is skip about half a dozen, at least a couple of pages of line of communication rules where for a battle scenario, they kind of want to make it easier for you to just get to playing. So basically, from our supply source that is located here, which it would not otherwise be in a campaign game, we're allowed to operate basically 18 primary hexes away from that, and then at the end of that line, so long as our force is within 5 hexes, um, with or without roads, we'll have forces in supply. So it reminds me a little bit of OCS, where like the 1 hex is close enough rule. In this, it's 5 hexes, but you still need to basically link off of a trunk line of maximum 18 primary road hexes. And if you're wondering, yes, that gets us out to Moscow, basically, or at least up near Moscow from Smolensk for the French. The Russians similarly have theirs up here, and same rules apply, right? But we're going to be largely on the defense operating as Russia. There are forces that are outside of the range of our sort of line of communication supply network, in which case, dealing with that is kind of its own, uh, will be its own challenge. In that they will be rolling on the worst part of the attrition table, and we'll talk about that. So just know that yes, there is the capability to get forces outside of your supply network to move and operate. It's just they're going to be under greater limitations, and they're going to be forced to use their initiative to activate rather than movement commands. Again, something that we'll talk about here. So just little things we need to watch out for. If this were a campaign game, those supply source markers would be at the ends of the map, basically. And then we would have what would be called a center of operations instead, probably in these hexes, respectively. And the center of operations do represent that forward hub of logistical activity, kind of how the supply marker is being used in the battle scenario. But with that comes a lot more complicated tracking of supply tracing and supply accounting and attenuation and a bunch of other things that we will eventually cover as I get closer to doing the campaign scenario situation. So lots to do there, but again, it's going to be easy for us, at least in this scenario, because we're just doing the battle. But keep in mind, there are these locations on the map that have the supply symbol, not just the depot, but the half moon supply symbol. That's where you can set your supply source, and based on where you set it, it could lead to different tracing, and that would be important in Russia, where in some cases, some of the depot hexes, like Orel and Bryansk, you actually need to be routing your supply um, down this down through here to be in good shape. If you're operating with your supply source out of Moscow, you might actually have some trouble tracing the supply correctly. So that does matter. There is a big sort of strategic element of like, where is your active supply being traced to? Is that more efficient or better off than some of the others? And I'm not sure how much we'll hit it in the battle scenario videos here, but something to keep in mind. And we'll see all of this play out uh, over the course of the coverage. Finally, just to show and keep in mind for the battle scenario, we're not going to be dealing with administrative points directly. So the scenario setup tells us how many administrative points we have. That will remain unchanged in a battle scenario. We don't need the extra rules to worry about, when we lose administrative points or gain administrative points. And so the game scenario information just tells us how many movement commands each side is going to get. On turn one, each side gets three, and then forevermore after, the French get two, the Russians get three. So the French start to lose a little bit there. And that is really a function of how deep into Russia they're operating. So we won't worry too much about administrative points in this video. We will worry about movement commands. And I think that's all the big major things I needed to get out of the way for the setup. Again, dumping 2 hours of somewhat incorrect information, mostly correct, but the parts that are incorrect just drive me nuts. So I've tried to simplify the conversation as much as possible. And so what we will really have out here is again, we're going to need to make some changes. I've got Platov out here. Really, he's not supposed to be in the hex like that. I don't think he is. So we'll make some corrections off camera. But we're going to get playing here very shortly for me and for you in the next segment. We're going to start off with the Russian player turn. So in almost every scenario, the Russian player is actually the first player, and so they will need to begin operating. And I think it is worthwhile to talk about what we're going to do as the Russians on turn one, because I think there's a lot of mistakes to be made tactically on what we do, or operationally, I should say, on what we do that could put us into trouble against the French. So as we get started looking at what we're going to actually do with the Russians, we should have a plan first, right, before we start playing. Um, I think the big mistake that we could make as the Russians here could be to attack the French head on in the given situation. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but to break it down all together, and I'm going to summarize quickly. Barclay and the leaders behind him, all here, could conceivably move to operate and attack the French, right? We're right next to Murat. Why not attack him right here, right now? We have overwhelming strength compared to what Murat is commanding. Right now, he's controlling, I think it's about 6 strength points. Barclay's got, well, much more than that at this point. And I think if I were to look, let's see, 9, I think it's like 15 or more for Barclay directly. I might be miscounting the artillery because you don't include them in the combat ratio. Um, Barclay by himself could probably convincingly put a hurt on Murat. Um, and if maybe we can figure out our command span a little bit better, we could also move Bagration and this other leader here around and put the hurt on. Maybe not a bad idea, but here's the problem. If we succeed, we could see pushing back a couple of these guys. But the road network is such that the French could reasonably outflank us through these minor roads back onto the primary road around, oh boy, Dorogobush. Likewise, there's a northern route that could be taken, and that would be bad. We could be outflanked and surrounded. We don't want that to happen. The other problem is, after the Russians do their movement, the French player has the opportunity to roll the initiative against the initiative ratings of his leaders around here and actually move them. And what could happen is we could very likely activate Napoleon himself, who's sitting there with 9-ish strength points and plenty of command span to operate with, and he could simply move in to support Murat, and what could happen is a somewhat equal or possibly French advantaged combat that, if the Russians lost, could spell some really, could lead to some really unfortunate circumstances. Now, especially if we say had the French decide to pick the pitched battle combat chit, even if the Russians pick pursuit, that if the French lose that initial engagement, even by, let's say, it's a 1-to-1 loss on the combat results table, but the attacker wins, well, the French could simply say, this is where we're going to have a pitched battle. And instead of fighting a battle near Borodino, we'd be fighting it, on the outskirts between Smolensk and Drogobush. I'm probably not saying that right. I'm so sorry, any folks that are going to notice that. Which I don't think would be to the Russians' advantage. And if the French could cause that pitched battle to have multiple rounds, and if they came out the winner, they could achieve a critical battle victory and increase morale, which at this point the Russians do not want to have happen. It is basically at Paris morale +2 or 3 that it becomes reasonably likely that if the French can take Moscow, they can get a negotiated surrender. Now that's more in the campaign context than a battle scenario, but I do want to think about how to achieve similar ends here. And maybe towards the end of the video, I'll just say, well, let's try to play on a little bit longer and see what happens since we're so close to Moscow. Let's roll the dice and find out if there would be a negotiation. That might be fun. But fighting here probably would not be to the Russians' advantage, I don't think, just based on the strength point comparison and the ability for the French, because they have pretty good leaders. We could activate I'm sorry, not the Major General, but we could activate the Polish folks in the forced march phase. Napoleon, maybe Eugene, but unlikely. But Ney, Davout, these are all really good leaders that we could rolled and activate for initiative movement during forced march and make the combat odds not to the benefit of the Russians. And the Russian command span is reasonably decked out already. That Barclay would be less likely to be able to get a concentration of effort from Bagration and this other leader here. So, really, not the situation I would want to be in for this. And I'm going to need to figure out a way to operate a bit differently. So, that is why, while we're right there, we could, sure, go in and try to attack the French. I don't think we're going to do that. And in fact, if we read the historical notes, there's a really good summary of the overall campaign, and you can pick up right where scenario 3 is, and you can see what the Russians actually did, which I won't deprive you the joy of reading that content. I will simply describe it. We would pull back the Russian army to Vyazma, or at least we start to drift backward, um, and start heading towards our supply source, while at the same time Kutuzov is up here, and we're going to concentrate effort. So what had happened was they drifted backward. Kutuzov came down that road line, and the Russian army sort of consolidated around here, which right around here is where Borodino occurred. Borodino is right at the tip of my finger there. That would be preferable because now we would have better strength points in a specific spot, and the terrain doesn't allow the French to really come out wide when they're this close. They could try to come down wide this way. That's awfully out of their way of the road network. They kind of get funneled towards Moscow along this road line where there's not a lot of extra branches like there are near Smolensk here that will force the combat in a very narrow corridor there. And that's where we'd rather have the combat occur, right? And that is the historical Borodino situation. So Kutuzov has plenty of strength points with him. There's also some strength points here. If we can consolidate, we're going to be in a much better combat position so that if we do fight the French, we're going to be at a better odds situation. And that's when, at that point, we might have the Russians play a pitched battle chit and let the dice fall where they may. The other nice thing that that does for the Russians as we move backward is that forces the French to continue to increase the terrain that they need to pass through. And the French could continue to attrit before combat, which is probably going to hurt the French more than the Russians. So we can hurt the French manpower and strength points um, without even fighting them, just by making them march, basically. So I know it's not terribly exciting, but the Russians are going to pull back. They're going to make a judicious retreat, so to speak, and work to get into a better setup for an eventual battle, pitched battle, major battle with Napoleon. But we're not going to do that near Smolensk at this point. We're on our way, back away. And that road network, again, it gets like wider at certain parts of the map. So here, there's a lot more maneuvering. It starts to get tighter right into this area here. So there is a lot of like, it's a, forward backward maneuvering, or a lot of, you don't have a ton of options because you need to kind of stick to the primary roads. A lot of the time you can do a little bit of maneuvering in certain parts of the map where the terrain or the roads really allow you to do wider uh, maneuvers. So that's going to be part of the strategy, is figuring out like where can you actually get movement. And keep in mind, the farther that you move and the bigger the force you move, the worse attrition will actually be, and we need to watch out for that. As the French, probably more than the Russians, but honestly, the Russians are going to lose some attrition as well. That's just going to be a part of it, no matter what we do. And so, to clarify that forced march bit, you can see actually on the phase track, there's Russian stuff, Russian stuff, Russian stuff. After Russian movement, there is this French flagged spot here that is the forced march. And you do pay extra attrition costs for doing this, so watch out for that. But this is to set up or spawn kind of a response movement before combat actually occurs. And likewise for the French turn, there's the Russian opportunity to do the same. And you can kind of create circumstances where you're forcing the Russians to attack you, right? Or your enemy to attack you if you force march a force into their zone of control. And that combat might not be ideal for the attacker, basically. And you can just sort of force that situation. In a game with more fog of war and vedettes and the whole thing, you could imagine that being a bit more of a critical element. Should also point out that yes, I don't have vedettes on the map. I don't have hidden markers. I'm playing the solitaire, and while playing solitaire, vedettes functionally do not have a use. There is a special unit that can come onto the board if you combine a lot of vedettes, and I'm just going to sort of fiat deploy that unit on the Russian side when the situation is appropriate, like when I would have had enough vedettes on the map to do it, because I don't want to take away that capability from the Russians. But vedettes in general can't do things like cut off supply or hurt combat units in any real meaningful way, and their primary use is to help reveal the fog of war and identify units. Because I'm playing solitaire, there's just no point in me doing that. It's moving around extra counters for no value, so I'm not going to do it. Same as I had done something similar when I played a Library of Napoleonic Battles scenario. I didn't use vedettes because they didn't functionally have any use. So I'm just saving myself some of that. I do lose something in the game, guys, by doing this. Not having Fog of War, playing it solitaire. I think the game is going to feel different if you're playing with Fog of War and vedettes against another player. I think that's probably where the core excitement of the game is going to exist, and I'm not going to be able to experience that. But solitaire is still a fine way to play this. Like there's still plenty of tough situations to play through, trying to play both sides to the best that I can, knowing that they have functionally, command operations satellites telling them where everything is at all times. But that's going to be unique to this game experience for me. If you're playing solitaire, you may want to do a similar thing or try it with vedettes. I'm not sure you're going to get much value out of that. But just know that functionally, the way I'm going to play this game will feel very different than if I were playing with Fog of War against a real opponent. I would like to do that at some point, but that's not the situation today, as I'm learning and teaching as I learn. So there you go. Okay, so that's enough of the strategy. What are we going to do? We're going to pull back. That's the main thing we're going to do, closer to our supply source. Let's actually follow the sequence of play and take this point by point. So for the sequence of play, I do have one printed out that I made in a two-column format, which I tried posting to BGG. At some point, it's going to go up there. Um, but I have it just reformatted out of the rulebook, copied and pasted, and then finangled, and I have it in my little placard here. Um, so first player turn. Actually, before we even do that, there is actually the weather determination phase. And so, well, let's check the weather, shall we? Now, the game charts have the weather table, and it's a pretty simple table. So we're in the month of August, so this cuts over on the months. So we're in August, so it could be mud, rain, fair, or heat. I guess, I don't know who benefits most from fair weather. Probably the Russians, or not the Russians, the French probably. So we'll roll a die and we'll see what we get. That will dictate the weather. Weather has effects on movement, attrition, and combat, basically. So we'll just need to keep that in mind. The effects we'll need a reference in the book. The player aid chart, or the charts booklet here, doesn't really spell out all the effects distinctly. We're going to have to check the exclusive rules and make sure we know what the situation is. But we will use the weather marker on the weather track on the map to remind us what the weather actually is. So rolling the die, what do we get? Oh, we rolled a 1, which is mud. Interesting. Okay. Muddy weather. This actually could pose a problem for the Russians and how quickly they can run away. Um, but that's going to go for the French ability to advance as well. So slower operations, obviously, that's going to affect how well we advance towards Moscow as the French. So the French probably are not happy with mud. A little reputizza maybe is going on here. Um, so the weather effects, there is a quick summary, but it's not spelled out, for everything. Um, I guess it is spelled out. I don't know. Maybe I'm full of crap, guys. Weather effects: heat and mud affect severity of march attrition. Okay. Rain and snow would affect initiative comparison, so that won't matter. Rain and mud do affect artillery die rolls, and we won't have to deal with severe weather at the moment because severe weather only affects frost and snow. So we've got some mud. So it's going to take a little bit more out of our oomph as we go to move and operate, take attrition, and our artillery is going to have a harder time. I think because the artillery shells, the actual cannonballs aren't going to be able to bounce the way they normally would, and that was really a huge part of the tactic was the bounce effect, knocking out people in formation and all of that. So that's all sensical. So we did that. Weather determination complete. The weather is muddy. It is mud in Russia today, and across our area of operations. And now we're going to have the first player turn again. That is Russia, and the normally the very first thing is the administrative segment, where we're going to get administrative points and adjust our supply source and all that good fun stuff. But those steps are only done in the campaign game, and we're not playing the campaign game. So we're going to ignore those for now. We're going to add, we would also add replacement strength points to the replacement pool, which would be important. But again, we're not going to have replacements or reinforcements in the battle scenario. And so all of that gets skipped, which puts us right into the organization segment. And I think just based on what's on the map here, I'm probably not going to make any changes to the map. But for the organization segment, what we will want to look at is the organizational display. So you can see the whole issue of command span, and I can address what I feel is probably some errata in the setup charts that caused all of my frustration, that required me to delete 2 videos because of my initial interpretation of the setup charts, where it's effectively giving us erroneous information and could be very, very much confusing. But I feel it's just some errata that folks don't notice because maybe folks aren't playing the Borodino scenario very often. So let's swap over to that. Okay, so the organization segment and the organizational display we have here. The key thing I'm going to point out is at the beginning of a scenario, it's definitely worth taking a look around and ensuring that your leaders have the command span needed for the units that are present. Now, as you play the game, you're always going to want to be making sure to meet the command span limitations and that you don't have insubordinate leaders, cases where the stacked units or leaders can't fit together and command properly, because if they don't fit, then you have to retreat units around for stacking purposes. So you could, in theory, figure out a way to get the appropriate stacking to have a high number of strength points, but generally you're going to cap out at something um, that's logical, and you have to manipulate on from there. So it's about the combat units and their command, uh, you know, weight or their subordinate value, less about the strength points. So keep that in mind. You could end up with like a huge amount of strength points, but it's about the organizational units that make up the strength points that matter. So, for instance, we were looking at Miloradovich here, 242. His command span is a 4. If someone commands him, that's a 2. Maybe I should zoom in a little bit to help with this. So he's got initiative of 2, so he's not a very dynamic leader. Command span of 4. If someone commands him, he takes up 2 of their command span. So generally, you want on these leaders a high first number, a high second number, and a low third number, if you can help it. Now, he has his own combat unit on his track. So right now, Miloradovich only commands his own corps, and it has 3 strength because it's on the 3 spot. Its maximum is a 3. That's the unit or the number here. 3 is the maximum. So he's at his maximum strength. The 5 is the movement allowance, and then 2 is how much of the command span of a leader this unit takes up. Right? Doesn't matter how many strength points it has, 1, 2, or 3. It's always going to take up 2 of the leader's command span. So Miloradovich's command span of 4, we have 2 used. He has 2 floating that is unused. So that stack is a-okay. Now, if we looked at Prince Gorchakov, 252, so not a great initiative. Command span of 5, he would take up 2. Here we see we've got this unit at maximum strength of 2, takes up 1. This unit, max is 3, but it's down to 2, takes up 2. So that's a total of 3. And then this cavalry unit, which is at its maximum of 1 strength point, takes up a half. So we are at 3.5. We still have 1.5. He is a-okay, right? So you're just seeing like how much span is available to any given leader. Here, Lieutenant General Austin II, he has 5, uses up 2. He's only got 1 strength point, so that's a very small stack. General Tormasov, he's got a little bit bigger of a stack, so we need to double check here. So we've got 1/2 for the cavalry, 1 and 2. So again, 3.5. He actually has a command span of 6, which makes him a reasonably important leader in terms of what if he ever got captured? Would he give up a morale change? He would. He's fine. Prince Bagration has just this one particular combat unit. Size 2, fits in a 6, no big deal, 3 strength. So far we're so good, right? General Wittgenstein takes up 3 at 5 strength, max strength. 3 is less than 5. This general is a-okay. So where's the problem that we have? Well, our problem is with Prince Barclay de Tolly. So as set up, and this is actually a really key point here, guys, there is undocumented errata in Scenario 3 setup charts. How do I know this? Well, a couple of things. On the leader chart, we have it stated that Doktorov is unit only, and his combat unit is with Barclay, which is represented here. His unit is right there, the blue banner Doktorov combat unit. And so we keep the Doktorov leader away from the organizational display. The leader's not in play. It would only be in play if we raised up Doktorov to be a subordinate leader, or we were going to break off that unit to be an independent command. But for Platov, he is subordinate to Barclay, which means that we would put, and we have here, the Platov leader counter on the picture of Barclay to denote that he is in the stack and he is subordinate, which means that um, the leader, Platov, takes up 3 of the 9 command span of Barclay, and Platov can have any number of units report to him so long as they fit in his 2 command span, right? So this is how you can kind of create a pyramid structure of command. Now, the problem is that all the units that are with Barclay right now, 2, 3, 1, so that would be 6, right? 7, 8, 9, and then 2 cavalry for half each. That brings us to 10. 10 exceeds the command span of 9, right? And the oddball thing here is that in terms of the units that are on the unit manifest, not the leader manifest, there are no units that are assigned to Platov. They're all in Barclay de Tolly's stack. So there's a little bit of fixing that needs to occur here. And on top of that, just to make you aware so that you're not confused by this, there is a unit that I've placed here, which is the Polin 3rd Cavalry Corps, that is not actually set up for Barclay de Tolly in the setup charts. It is listed, this is the errata, potentially, um, uh, is listed as being on Doktorov's organizational display chart or track. The problem is, Doktorov is not an independent command or even a subordinate leader. He's totally off the game map with his combat unit reporting directly to Barclay de Tolly. So one of 2 things can be true, and both of these things cannot be true at the same time. Either that Polin cavalry is reporting to Doktorov, in which case the errata is on the Doktorov combat unit indicating, the Doktorov leader manifest that says that he is combat unit only. That's incorrect. And we would say that Doktorov, the leader, is subordinate to Barclay de Tolly. So that would be a fix. That would be one version of the errata. The other is to say that the Polin Cavalry Corps reports directly to Barclay instead of Doktorov, and that would be the errata. But you can't have both cases. So one has to be true, but as is in the game, one of these has to be incorrect and needs to be errata. That is the core issue that threw me for a loop when I first tried to explain how all of this command stuff worked. And it's just coming down to me as there being a setup errata problem that has not been clearly identified up to this point. But it's really water underneath the bridge, because the fix for this is addressed immediately in the game, right? The very first thing we do after we've determined the weather is to do the organization segment, in which case we would be sorting out all of this stuff anyway to make sure that Barclay, his command span of 9, is properly constructed and addressed. And to me, part of the solution is going to be making sure that Doktorov and Platov are both raised up to be commanded by Barclay de Tolly, and we move some of these units from the Barclay de Tolly track to the respective leader track to better fit the command span. So how do we do that? Well, if we're going to leverage the ability for us to um, easily organize this stuff, we're going to want to break off some of the units uh, and stack them just a little bit differently, right? So that's what we're going to need to do here, is figure out a way for Barclay de Tolly not to have a command span of 10, but a command span of 9 or less, and arrange the units on the tracks to better match that. In the hex itself on the map, we're only going to have the Barclay leader counter. These other counters, whether we're bringing Doktorov up as a subordinate leader or Platov or whatever, is going to be some version of this. Now, when we get to the movement segment, we could pick one of these leaders and put the leader unit on the map and either leave them behind or have them activate as an independent movement command and move away from Barclay. So, how we set up the units, we want it to be accurate through this turn so that next turn, um, or as we go to the movement segment, if we need to separate Barclay's stack, the leaders have what units we think we'll need, right? So everything else is fine on the organizational display, but it's just the main force with Barclay that we need to think of. Do we expect Doktorov to be operating on his own at any point? Do we just want to keep them all together? In which case, we just need to get the stacking, command stacking, sorted out in a logical manner, and having Doktorov prepared to be on his own or Platov be on his own doesn't matter as much. It's just up to the player to decide how they want to manage this situation. So if we wanted to split this up a bit better, and let me make sure the Platov is track is in place. So let's start with the cavalry. It certainly makes sense to have the cavalry with a Cossack leader. So if we simply said, we're going to go ahead and let this guy be here. Now, just to point out, folks, if you want to read the rules and try to figure out like what is the way to represent this on the organizational display, even if I have to wonder if this is actually correct, but to me it is much easier to manage stacks of counters if I separate them this way. So I know here's Barclay Tali, he has Platov. I'm going to look at who is reporting to Platov. That is easier for me to manage by itself. So this is one subordinate level or subordinate point, two halves together, being in this stack with Platov. He's still got one more to go, and we'll keep that in mind. Then we have Doktorov. Doktorov has a command span of 5, so we could certainly move some stuff around here, right? We could go like that and like that. And then he's got his own combat unit as well as this additional infantry corps, and that maxes out his command span, right? And now these two leaders together take up 6 of Barclay de Tolly's 9. So we have 3 left over. Do we have 3 left, or do we need to make a further segment? Nope. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So we need to move one more unit. What I could do, as I look through this, is I think I want to keep the artillery with Barclay. But why don't I take this guy and stick him, because he's a subordinate value of 1. Let me go ahead and stick him on Platov. Now here's the problem with that. He's only got a movement point value of 5 versus the cavalry 6. So Ataman Platov could not necessarily operate just as good as a full, only having cavalry and being able to move 6. But for now, I'm okay with this structure. So again, 1 plus 2 halves, that's 2. That is equal to his command span of 2. And then the remnants here on Barclay directly is he's commanding these 2 corps, and he's commanding the artillery train here. So we're going to count up Barclay de Tolly's command span again. 1, 2, 3, then 6 for commanding Platov as an aggregate, and commanding 9, from 6 to 9 for commanding Doktorov. Now, there's different ways that we could mess with that. For instance, like it might actually be cheaper in terms of command span to simply have Barclay command all these units directly himself and unemploy Platov, but he gets removed from the game if he becomes unemployed, if I remember correctly in the rules. So we're going to take this setup, and I'm happy with it for now. We would certainly want to maybe send off a major general and like take this unit and move them to support a different leader, like say Bagration. So he'd had more strength points with him individually. Um, but even as is, right, this stack for Barclay is maxed out. We have no room now for anything else. This is why we can't stack Barclay and Bagration together. That would be a problem. Um, Really, the only Russian leader with a better command span is Kutuzov, and Kutuzov will eventually join up with the rest of the crew soon enough, and he may be able to provide additional command capabilities. So, for instance, all this stuff underneath Barclay de Tolly is one thing, but Barclay, if he's commanding 9 units, right? If we brought some of these units back onto Barclay's track and we sent Doktorov away and Platov away, he could still have 9 subordinate ratings worth of units, and he could be then commanded by Kutuzov and take up 3 of Kutuzov's 10 command span. So if you start to look at this, like right now, we're kind of in an oddball situation where our best leader is already commanding as many units as he can really handle at the moment. But once Kutuzov comes down, we could do some additional reorganization ahead of, say, a battle at Borodino, and be able to stack more of our forces in one big collective, or even use Kutuzov, his high command span, to command a multi-hex force and basically have, say, Bagration in one hex, Barclay in another hex, sitting with Kutuzov directly, and be commanding quite a number of units all together, all told. So watch out for that. That's going to be something we'll need to look at as we operate. So part of this game is indeed not just maneuvering the forces, but making sure that you're keeping a good handle on how they're organized on the field and leveraging your logistics, and setting up for ideal combats. So that's the organization segment here, guys. That's it. That's how we are going to rearrange Barclay's forces so that they're a little more sensical. We'll want to continue to change that setup over time. And again, a big core part of our movement segment coming up will be how do we start to bring our units together in a way that will make sense for Kutuzov to have an advantage for commanding forces and operating. So expect to have to do more reorganization every turn to make sure, like, hey, is this the way I want it set up? Do I need to adjust anything? Also, by the way, what can matter here is you can also swap strength points between units. Not that it's a big deal, but you could, for instance, say, I'm going to give a strength point from this unit to that unit. You would effectively be swapping the counter positions. There's not much reason to do that, and really this only comes down to, like, do you want to bring a counter that's low on strength up higher from a unit that is high? So like you could maybe stack these guys together at some point and decrease to increase and basically even them out. The reason why you would do this is once a combat unit is eliminated, it's gone and it can't come back. So some of these that are really down low on strength point, they're kind of in danger of being lost. And what you need them for is to be containers of strength points that you shuffle around. Think of it like buckets, a bucket of water. Like you don't want to lose the bucket, even if it doesn't have a lot of water in it. If you want to balance the load, that's fine. But once you lose a bucket, you're going to have a hard time carrying your water around, right? That's a weird analog, but just to help you think about the utility of the combat units and the leaders and the way that the command span stuff works. Okay, well, with that done, I think we can return to the map proper and start talking about the movement commands that we're going to need to issue, and then the rest of the initiative-based commands. So when it comes to movement, the key thing is we could, if we really wanted to, we could break up Barclay's stack, send Platov off, Doktorov off separately as separate movements, but that would each cost a movement command to do that. That is a distinct force moving, that is a distinct movement action. And unfortunately, neither of those leaders has the sort of initiative that I really want to be able to make this maneuver. The reason why I would want to separate them out is that smaller stacks, when they move, will take less attrition. So there is sort of the idea of, separating your force and then concentrating for battle, that kind of Napoleonic marching could factor in here. The only problem is, very generally, the Russians just don't have the command initiative to do that the same way that the French can. So Barclay is going to have to move his big, massive stack, large stack of forces together, and possibly incur, well, probably quite a bit of attrition if we're not careful. Right? We don't want to spend too much strength just moving when we're aiming to get strength by consolidating our forces. So we need to think that through, which may mean we don't move super duper far. I also want to keep Bagration and this other leader nearby because we are going to be moving. There's danger in moving and maybe being isolated such that the French can catch up to us and defeat us in detail. We don't want that. We do have one nice thing, which is we do want to be moving Kutuzov, and Kutuzov is a unemployed leader at the moment. He doesn't have any units reporting to him, which means he can move 9 movement points independently, which kind of gets him almost wherever we want him to be quite honest. And so I might move him last because it could be that we move him into um, the middle of our Russian formation, and uh, then Kutuzov takes command very reasonably. 9 movement points is pretty good when you consider that primary roads are only half a movement point. So from where he's at now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We could almost move him down straight away, but again, I don't like the way that the road network is situated, and I think the French have too many avenues of approach than we really want to deal with. So we can just safely keep pulling back. Um, I think that's a fine idea to try for. I'm not sure that I want to pull back to Vyazma. I might actually want to pull back further, so that if the French concentrate moving along these roads, they would concentrate at Vyazma. We would be behind it, and it would be harder to approach and engage us, in here potentially. It's hard to say. It's tough to say. I'm like looking at the history to inform what we do because we could simply battle it out down here, but I just don't think that that's going to be to the Russian advantage. If we sent everybody forward, we would not be maybe getting usage out of the river here. We want to defend over the river where we can. Um, and the river lines just don't match up with the road except for at that bridge that goes into that location. So I think that is what we want to do. We want to try to pull back. Now we have 3 movement commands. That means 3 guaranteed moves with our forces. Despite Barclay and Bagration having 4s for initiative, that's still not ideal for wanting to move the distance that we want to move. And so I'm simply going to use, I think, all 3 of our movement commands here, here, and here. Just do that. And we'll probably move Barclay first and just see, move him back, and then we'll move these guys behind him as we go, um, and operate that way. And if we can get to the other side of this garrison, at least the garrison can sit there and be, a blocker to some of the French moves. Nothing we need to watch out for here is if we don't want to engage with the French, we need to move far enough that they're going to be not incentivized to try to force march after us, because the French are going to force march and then they're going to get their own movement, and then it'll be up to the Russians to try to force march away if we want to withdraw away from combat. And again, we don't have as good of initiative as the French on average, at least in the sector, generally speaking. The French leaders either match initiative or are better. Um, so we can't guarantee that we're going to be able to get away. And just imagine that situation where Barclay rolls a 5 or a 6 to try to get away. He fails to do that, and some part of his force gets chewed up by the mass of the French army. We don't want that to happen. which means that for every other force on the map that we would want to use, we might not move this guy at all. Kutuzov gets to move for free as an unemployed leader, but we do have forces that are actually out on the map elsewhere, over here, and even down here. These guys will need to activate with initiative, and they're going to have there's no option to use a movement command for them because they're not in command. They're outside the range, the 18 hex range of our supply source in a battle scenario. So I can't give those guys movement commands even if I wanted to. And so we'll just see, it's a very low chance that they're going to activate. And then all standing forces, I guess there's one leader north in the northwest of the not northwest of the whole line. But this guy actually has an initiative of 4, so he might activate. Um, but then any standing units will also take attrition. It's just going to be less attrition to worry about. The key thing here is for every movement that we do at this point in the scenario, if we have reinforcements, they would get to move for free first and just as if they had a movement command and get onto the map. That's great. Otherwise, when we go to do movement, we say we're going to use this type of command. We go to do all of our movement commands first, but we're going to say here's a command. This is the force that is moving, either a subset of what's there in a stack or the stack itself. If we have to make a new force with a major general to do it, we would do it. We would then move the force. We would keep track of how many movement points were spent, and then we would roll for attrition. And the attrition table is actually a really interesting, multifaceted table where you're looking at, are you Russian, are you French? And then you're going to roll a die, a single die. There's a whole host of modifiers based on leader bonus, which a lot of our leaders right now for the Russians do have a bonus. We're also going to apply morale. So this is a bad thing for the Russians because of the Paris morale track being positive. So that maybe even knocks each other out. That evens things out. If it is mud, we're going to add 2 to the die roll, so that's not good. And then you can see there's a few other modifiers. But what you would do is based on the number of movement points you actually expended. So imagine maybe we would move 3 to 4. We roll a die, we're going to add 2, which means we might be somewhere in the 5 to 6 or 7 or 8 column. If we look down, then where we're going to be looking is, well, how many APs do we have? Well, the Russians have 11, but the size of the force, let's say if it is Barclay, is going to be, what do we say? The force and strength points is going to be somewhere up around 8 to 10 or 11 to 15, and you can start to see where these things match up. We'd maybe lose a strength point, let's say, as an example, just moving 3 to 4 movement points. So that attempt to aggregate, which might not actually get us that much, we would be functionally trying to get, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say we spent the 4 movement points to get up here. We would maybe lose a strength point, but we would gain 3 from Miloradovich. That sort of thing is kind of what we would need to be dealing with, I guess. So that's the trick that we need to be prepared for. That's actually not that bad, honestly. So 1, 2, 3. Oh, I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, we'd need 4.5, which pushes us into another column shift that still would probably, it looks like, only be 1 strength point loss. So maybe we would want to run up here. But for command reasons, we would probably want to move Kutuzov down here first. Okay. So that way we don't have a insubordinate stack, because Miloradovich can't actually stack well with Barclay, because Barclay's command limit is already maximized. But if we moved Kutuzov down there first, right, Kutuzov has a command span of 10, so there'd be 2 for Milodovic, 3 for Barclay. But then we'd have to restructure the leaders under Barclay because a subordinate leader can't have a subordinate leader. So are you starting to see the challenge here, guys, in the organization? Like I like this is a good thing, not a bad thing. This is a good thing because it forces you to manage your army and manage movement and manage your maneuvering. So you have control of that, right? We could hightail it back here, but we might have too much consolidation before we can really get our stacks situated, which would not necessarily be a good thing. Um, I could pull Barclay back to here. That might be better. Um, and then let these other forces form up with Kutuzov and have Barclay remain an independent command. So these are the thoughts I need to be making, right? If I'm going to put myself in the chair of Barclay, let's say, or Kutuzov, and the Russian command staff here, like what is the best thing for me to do? I need to pull back, but where am I going to pull back? How far am I going to force my men to march? In addition, this is the other concern because the weather is mud. If we take a strength point loss in marching, we're going to have to lose it from artillery, which, man, okay, we're going to try to hightail it out of here. Well, we're going to have to leave some guns behind, I guess. We would probably sabotage them so that the French couldn't use them. Um, but we would still have to lose that strength point on the march from our artillery. And we don't have much. That doesn't sound great, so maybe I need to not march all the way uh, back here yet. Maybe I need to take a smaller swing to get down there, right? All possible. All things we need to try to keep in mind. So if I try to minimize, right, I'm thinking about my attrition loss and the fact that I've got some negative modifiers. Well, they're positive modifiers, but negative to my situation. 1, 2, 3. Can I get away with going 4? I might as well, if I'm going to do that, I might as well go 4. I could pull Barclay all the way back here. I think that's what I'm going to try to do. And just expect that the French are going to have their own time trying to get up here. So even Murat chasing us would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, they could still get up on their own move, but they're going to take attrition. Probably take more attrition than we would based on the chart structure. So we are going to move. So I'm going to say, first of all, I am just going to move Kutuzov down here, and I'm going to stick him there, and we're going to end up doing a consolidation activity, but we don't need to do that until the very end. So we know that Kutuzov is basically going to take Miloradovich as a subordinate, and that'll be enough for the moment. And now we're going to use a movement command. So I'm going to move my movement command marker, which is just a quarters marker I'm repurposing because I did not see an actual counter for this. We're going to say we're going to move Barclay. We're not taking the garrison with them. We're going to leave that behind. And we're going to move Barclay. Now, again, I want to think this through. First of all, I need to make sure I know my movement allowance. If I want to keep everybody together, I need to use up to 5 movement points. I have cavalry in the stack, but cavalry can move up to 6, but it's mostly infantry, and that's all we really want to be worried about. We can move through friendly forces, and we are not in the Zok of Murat because we didn't start that way. I don't believe we start that way. So we would go on primary roads, keeping in mind 1, 2, 3. Where's the break point? I could go one more and still be on the same break point. So I could go all the way back here. So that is 4 movement points. That's a break point on the chart. We go any further and we move another spot on the attrition chart, which would not be good. But if you're going to move 3, the Russians here. You might as well move 4 if it's going to get you into a better position. I think in this case, being closer to Kutuzov will be helpful. And now we need to roll the dice. So again, if I look at all the strength points in his stack, I do want to count that up. So we have 1, 2, 3, 9, 13, 16, I think, if I'm reading all this right. Yeah, 16. Okay. So 16 strength points, that's actually a lot. I maybe would have been better off leaving somebody behind there. Um, but we'll see what the die rolls give us. And so 16 to 20, we have 11 APs. That's going to help us a lot here. And I'm going to roll the die. I'm going to add the French morale, Paris morale of 1. I'm going to subtract 1 for Barclay's leader bonus, which is the star on the counter. We're also going to add 2 to the die roll because of the mud. And that's it. So we're going to roll the die. And I rolled a 1, thank goodness. So if we want to check this on the chart, so 1 plus 2 is a 3. So again, we rolled we moved 4. So we're on the 3, right? And then if we cross-reference down here, right, so remember we're on this column, we are 16 strength points with 11 AP. So we cross-reference there, and we find a 0. No attrition for Barclay, despite moving a very large body of troops. So we are very, very fortunate with that movement command. We moved a lot of forces very quickly. With fair speed, we were near Kutuzov, great, and we didn't lose anybody for it. That's a win-win-win, baby. That's really good. So yes, but movement is a really tricky thing, and you need to manage your movement, and probably because you can look at the chart and you can kind of guess where the die rolls are going to go. The like you pre-plan your moves and figure out your attrition. Now, had I rolled anything else, I would have lost a strength point. So I rolled exactly what I needed to roll. So good start for luck for the Russians here. So that's one movement done, right? We finished the movement. I'm going to use another movement command, and I'm going to go ahead and activate Gorchakov. Now, he doesn't have as much. He has 5 strength points, which means that for all things considered, he can move as far as he wants. It doesn't really matter. I'm rolling the die. I rolled a 3 plus 2 is a 5. So just looking at it on my own, right? He could move basically as much as he wants, which we're not going to worry too much about. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and he's going to sit with Kutuzov. With Miloradovich, we will reconsolidate this stack after movement. And now we're going to do one more movement command, our last one, and we're going to move Bagration. Bagration only has 3 strength points. That's not much. So similarly, he can move as much as we really think we need him to. And what I'm probably going to do is have him go 1, 2, 3, 4, and wind up here. And so again, rolling the die almost doesn't matter what I roll here. Rolled another 3 plus 5. He doesn't lose anything either. So there we go. Those are our 3 movement commands. Easy peasy from my perspective for the Russians. Very easy to trace where we're going. We're not stopping at Vyazma. We're going to go ahead and move all the way back because I think the terrain is going to be better for us. essentially. Now the question will be: will any of our other forces? I'm going to rotate the camera here. Um, try to move. Now there's a stack in Riga. I see no reason to move them, as best as I can tell. So I don't think I'm going to move those guys. We do have some other forces. I'm going to have to shift the camera view here. Down here, as well as up here. So let's see about the capabilities here. They're not particularly strong. Uh, Tormasov is actually not terrible. But the leaders down south here, I don't have a good way to show it on camera without really skewing your perspective. So I'm going to roll to see if I can activate any of these guys. I probably am not going to be able to do it because their initiative is a 2. Um, yep, fail. Tormasov, oh, big fail. Okay, they're not going anywhere. The Riga guy, I'm not even going to bother. And then he could activate. I'm trying to think of what I would be doing with him. We've got Saint-Cyr here, and let's see, he's got 6 strength points with him. Um, and who is that? Wittgenstein. Huh. Yeah, I don't know that I actually want to move anybody right now. I think I'm good. Everywhere else does not really matter to me at this point. I'm not particularly concerned with it. I do have a major general, but his initiative is so low. Let me try it. Nope, he didn't get it either. Okay. All right. So we are functionally done with all of our uh, initiative movement. Basically, all the die rolls, even the one that maybe could have gone, I didn't even really want to move them because I'm not sure what to do with them yet. Um, is it is actually no. I do want to roll for him. I need to get him. I need to try to get him away. Oh, no, he's fine. Never mind. Never mind. I'm good. Um, all the leaders on the board don't have particularly good initiatives, which means like rolling above their initiative is either going to give us like no movement or they're not going to move at all or a little bit of movement, like 1 hex of movement, and that's not really helpful to them. So no other movement outside the main area of operations, unfortunately. Now we do need to take stationary attrition. So forces that did not move now check for attrition. Granted, most of these forces uh, might not have a lot of attrition, excepting for the fact that they are outside of communications, which is a problem. Um, so, yeah, let me see about that. I think they're going to have to roll not on the 11 AP. They might get shifted down to this 0 no line of communication. In which case, you can see even if you're dealing with a handful of SP, it is possible that you're going to take attrition no matter what. Um, only on the big stack. So let me look at this for a second. If we said they moved 0, right? They didn't move. And we can look 0 line of communication or 0 here. So what would we roll? We would add 3 to the die roll because they don't have a leader. Which means that if we rolled a 1, we would get a 4 only if a stack has 8 or more, so that wouldn't be a problem. But if we did start to roll higher, so let's say we rolled a 9, it is possible that we would get some attrition. So that's unfortunate. That is unfortunate. We're going to have to see what happens to these Russians with that. Yeah, doing a double check of the rules, that will be the case. So, um, the force up in Riga Actually, just has a garrison. I don't think that leader has anything. Uh, yeah, so he's actually fine. This guy we do need to roll. Uh, Wittgenstein has five strength points, so that will matter here. I roll. I got a 3. Plus 3 is a 6. So let's see. He didn't move. Our value was a 6. And he's got 5 strength points with no line of communication. He actually takes a step loss. So just to show that here, Wittgenstein here, he loses 1 strength point. So we move a combat unit down 1. Not good. Not good. Not good at all. And then we've got Tormasov, who might be in a similar situation. But he rolled a 1, so that becomes a 4. And he is safe, so that's good. And then Osman Sakin rolled a 5, that becomes an 8. Didn't move. Let's see. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. There is a rata, and you don't add the weather modifier if the forces didn't move. So that's actually my bad. Would that have saved Wittgenstein? Probably. Let me look here. He's got 5. What did we roll? Yeah, no, Wittgenstein did not lose 1. Okay, my bad. And neither did anybody else for that matter. All the other die rolls are clean for this purpose. So anyway, worth a tangent, guys. There is errata. You're going to want to check the update file, which I was able to find on Consim World. It's minor errata, but things like you don't add the weather modifier if the force didn't move. So we were really only adding one for uh, the Paris morale chart. But fortunately, our stationary forces that didn't move didn't lose any men. Not to say they wouldn't have lost any in this context, but just like not enough to comprise a strength point. So they're good to go, and we're done. So now we need to consolidate over in Kutuzov's hex. So if I zoom in here for a second and try to get some focus, what we have is Kutuzov with Urkchow and Miloradovich. We're going to put Kutuzov here. And these two leaders together have a uh, subordination value of 4. That's way under 10. So we're going to go ahead and let that be moved off. So the leader counters we're going to put on Kutuzov's picture. And at least for the moment, I don't see whether or not it's going to matter that we move the actual combat units over. Yeah, no, we don't really need to worry about that. So these leaders now simply are commanded by Kutuzov, and we actually have the ability, if we need to create a multi-hex force by saying Bagration is also our subordinate. And we're putting Bagration here because there is this alternative road path that swings up around, and I don't want to leave that exposed. We at least have him here, and he could activate and move to cut off a force that bypasses him, something like that. I don't know that that's a great move, but that's the move I'm going to try to make here. Okay, so we did our consolidation. Are we going to repair or destroy bridges? Not right now, we're not. Which now leads us to the combat phase. And the beginning of the combat phase, right now, there's no obvious engagements. We're not officially in the zone of control of any particular force. This garrison is not in the zone of control of Murat because we didn't move it forward towards Murat. But it could mean that the French themselves try to try to push through, and really they can repulse that garrison, I believe, and drop a French garrison behind them pretty easily. So it's not like there's a lot of speed bumps here. But the question would be, do we actually activate any French forces for forced march? This is our opportunity to kind of, seize some initiative as the French player. We can say, hey, I'm going to activate this force, and then we're going to go do a thing that might go very well for us. It might not go very well for us. Um, the cost here is that there's a big modifier to the attrition die roll. So if we choose to move now, we're almost certainly going to take attrition, and that attrition could move very badly. It could be terrible attrition. If we again look at our March attrition table, the French are on a worse chart, right? They're over here, not the Russians. They're here. So it's like a whole column shift down for them. If we look at the actual modifier, a forced march is add one of the die roll for each movement point expended up to a maximum modifier of 4. So if we really tried to chase the Russians right now, imagine that's adding a +4. We'd get a -1 for good leaders for some of the French forces. We'd get a -1 for the Paris morale tract. But then another +2 because of mud, which would get us somewhere between 2, 4 die roll modifier, which means we could end up on the 10. And if we end up on the 10 and we moved, let's say, 4 movement points, if you look here, it's multiple step losses no matter what we do. So at most, what we would maybe want to be trying to do is make little movements. And even then, I'm not sure I actually want to do that, to be quite honest. I'm not sure that I want to do that. So give me a second here. I'm going to go off camera and think this through. Do we want to try to make anything happen there? I'm not sure that I do. Maybe it's worthwhile to move a little bit to take this depot, and then be prepared to move towards Vyazma, and then worry about our own engagements on our actual turn, in which case we'll be marching again and potentially taking more attrition losses. That we're fighting distance in this campaign as the French. That's our big concern. This whole time that we've been advancing and taking things and deploying garrisons, the whole while we're doing that, we're reducing our strength, and we're going to need plenty of it if we're going to defeat the Russians in a field battle and eventually get to Moscow. So let me take a look at this. Okay, here's my bad, guys. This is a nuance in the rules, and I'm sure if somebody's been watching up to this point, they're getting ready to comment on my pending mistake that I did not make. Forced march actually requires that if you're going to enter, you can be next to an enemy. So we could move around there, but we can't actually enter a Zoc unless the hex there already has units engaged in a Zoc. So this force march is almost like the counter move to reinforce one of your units or one of your forces that is about to be attacked or is likely to be engaged in combat. But because we don't have anybody in Zocs right now, like despite all this movement and being adjacent, we're not in the Zoc in either situation at the moment. We can't enter a Zoc, right? That you make sure you think about that. Force march, we can force march, and that could just get us further along. That's fine. We can do that with any of our forces that we activate via initiative specifically. But we can't enter into a Zoc. What we can do is we can attempt a repulse to push that garrison out of the town and establish another depot for us, which that would be fine, or I'd be okay with doing that ultimately. But at least for the moment, I can't actually do anything else that would create combat circumstances. So I think I've mentioned a couple times in this video, hey, maybe I catch the Russians and they're forced to attack me. That's not going to be how it works. It is if once we're already in a Zoc, because the Russians have advanced, to us, we're in each other's Zoc at that point. Then you can force march a unit in to help them, but we can't create new engaged Zoc circumstances ourselves. The only thing we can really do to hurt the Russians would be a repulse attempt. Now, those in a game with no fog of war, the repulse attempts will always be successful because we know if it's going to be a 5-1 advantage. And in fact, Murat has 5 strength points in his stack here. He could repulse and force this garrison to retreat out functionally. So our one option, which is to do a repulse, would simply push this unit out, and we would continue to push it out, I guess, until we stopped moving, just taking on more and more attrition to do so. And I don't want to do that right now, I don't think. This could be the part where it's like I'm not being aggressive enough. But I don't want to take that extra attrition loss just to move a garrison out of the way, and the garrison is still there, and the garrison still has a strength point, and the possibility that the strength point's going to be there, causing us inconvenience no matter what. When we can more easily simply push this force out of the way functionally later on. It's a hard thing. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to push this guy to here with Murat. That's assuming we pass initiative check. So I'm going to roll that now. And we succeeded in the initiative check for Murat with a die roll of 3. So we go ahead, we push him out of the way. That uses a movement point, and we're going to stop moving. What's going to end up happening here is we're going to put down a French garrison, but I'm going to roll that initiative, or not that initiative, that attrition. So we had a force French moved 1, and that's a good leader. So that's a -1, -2, +2 for the weather, right? And then we're going to add 1. So at the end of the day, this wraps up to a +1 die roll. Okay, we rolled a 4. So 4 and a strength of 5. With how many APs do we have? Just 6? Is 0. So we are good there. So Murat pushes this garrison out, and then we can probably put a depot down. Now, in the battle scenarios, placing a depot is not as critically important immediately. We will want to make sure we have them. So I'm just going to do that here for this given situation and take a point off of the infantry that Murat has in his stack. While the French cannot place a depot yet, that would come during a reorganization segment. This helps us clear the road out a little bit. So now, rather than getting clogged and jammed in this area, we can actually have these French forces come up and move out, or move through Murat to here, and we can get off various attacks to clear the road and keep moving. We could decide to repulse, and we could keep repulsing, but I want to be in place with we basically got to do this for free, right? We didn't lose anything. I want to clear the way just to get a little bit further ahead on what we're doing with that cost functionally nothing for us to do to gain a hex where we could continue to move and operate. We are not, as far as I understand, engaged in their Zoc. because you're allowed to do these repulse actions during a forced march, and it seems to imply as that force retreats that you're no longer in a you're not in a Zoc at the end of that. And I think that's all the forced marching that we're going to do here. Anything else just seems really expensive for attrition at the moment, and I'm going to end up having to I'm going to have to solve this problem of the log jam with these garrisons with easy attacks. That won't really be the problem. It'll just be that we've lost some time and effort knocking out these garrisons and having to to wrangle that. I would much rather just fight these garrisons here as single strength points than to add strength points to the big stacks. And arguably, we could have taken these garrisons with us as strength points as the Russians, but I'm leaving them there as kind of delaying forces. So it's all copacetic from my perspective here. Anyway, with the forced march stuff done, now we would go to the Russian combat phase. But again, the Russians really aren't in any situation to conduct combat, so there's no combat at all. And that's the end of the Russian player turn of the first turn of this battle scenario. And I think this video is quite long enough. So I'm going to call it here. We will see you in the next video where we will have the French turn, French player turn, and we'll just keep playing on through. So this turn we explained a lot about movement and the attrition. I'm not going to probably cover those things in as much depth in the next video. So the French will simply move, or I'll do a cut and show movement. In the situation where we're going to have a big combat, that's probably where we'll spend some time articulating the combat rules and kind of what is going on there and how to make it work in your favor. But there's plenty more to come there, so a big chunk of that video will probably address those aspects as we go, and then we'll hit turn 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for the battle scenario. So see you in the next one, guys. In the meantime, take care and keep on gaming.